In the gray dawn of March 3, 1943, the waters of the Bismarck Sea stretched before a massive Japanese convoy like a deceptively calm highway to hell. 8 transport ships, each packed with hundreds of battle-hardened soldiers from the 51st Imperial Division, churned through the Pacific swells toward their destination at Lae, New Guinea. Behind them, the smoking stacks of 8 destroyer escorts and the drone of over 100 Zero fighters provided what their commanders believed was impenetrable protection. Within hours, the sea would be littered with burning wreckage, twisted metal, and the bodies of thousands of men who would never see another sunrise. The convoy that had departed Simpson Harbor in Rabaul with such confidence would become the graveyard for over 3,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors. Men who had sailed from port believing they were reinforcing a vital strategic position, only to discover they were sailing into the most devastating display of Allied air power the Pacific War had yet witnessed. The architect of this destruction was not a single weapon or a single commander, but a revolutionary aircraft that had been transformed from a conventional medium bomber into something far more deadly: the North American B-25 Mitchell. In the hands of innovative American airmen, the B-25 had evolved beyond its original design parameters to become what military historians would later call the most heavily armed aircraft in the U.S. Army Air Force's inventory. But the story of how 8,000 Japanese soldiers never made it to shore begins months earlier, in the workshops and airfields where American ingenuity met wartime desperation. The transformation of the B-25 from a conventional bomber into a ship-killing predator was the work of men who understood that traditional high-altitude bombing tactics were failing against moving maritime targets. A year earlier, American airmen struggled to hit moving ships from high altitude. Bombs dropped from 20,000 feet were easy to dodge. The frustration of watching Japanese convoys slip through repeated air attacks had driven Allied commanders to seek new solutions. Traditional bombing doctrine, developed for stationary targets like factories and airfields, proved inadequate against vessels that could maneuver at sea. That changed when 2 men, Major William Benn and maverick pilot Paul Pappy, gun-transformed the B-25 into a maritime predator. These innovations would prove to be the key to one of the most complete military victories in the Pacific War, a battle where superior tactics and technology would overcome overwhelming numerical odds. The Japanese convoy that set sail on the night of February 28, 1943, represented one of the most ambitious reinforcement efforts of the Pacific War. The convoy, comprising 8 destroyers and 8 troop transports with an escort of approximately 100 fighter aircraft, set out from Simpson Harbor in Rabaul. The scale of this operation reflected the desperate strategic situation facing Japanese forces in New Guinea, where Allied pressure was steadily eroding their positions. The Japanese commanders at Rabaul believed that Lae and Salamaua were an essential part of their defensive perimeter, and so they decided to send 6,900 men from the 51st Division to reinforce the area. A lack of alternatives meant that the division would have to travel by sea in a fleet of 8 transport ships and 8 destroyers. This decision to risk such a large force in a single convoy demonstrated both the importance of the New Guinea theater to Japanese strategy and their growing recognition that alternatives were rapidly diminishing. The Japanese military leadership had learned from previous convoy attempts. The division's equipment was spread evenly between the 8 transports so that the loss of a single ship wouldn't be a disaster. They had also assembled around 200 aircraft within range to provide protective cover for the convoy. In terms of traditional naval doctrine, This represented a formidable escort force that should have been capable of defeating any air attack. But the Japanese were sailing into waters where traditional naval doctrine was about to be rendered obsolete by innovations they could neither anticipate nor counter. Unknown to the convoy commanders, the Allies had detected preparations for the convoy, and naval codebreakers in Melbourne, Frumel, and Washington, D.C., had decrypted and translated messages indicating the convoy's intended destination and date of arrival. More critically, the Allied forces waiting for them had spent months developing new techniques, such as skip bombing, that they hoped would improve the chances of a successful air attack on ships. The Japanese convoy was sailing toward an enemy that had fundamentally reimagined the relationship between air power and naval warfare. The man behind these innovations was Major Paul Irving "Pappy" Gunn, a former U.S. Navy enlisted pilot who had become the commander of air transport in Australia. Gunn's revolutionary modifications to Allied aircraft would transform the nature of anti-shipping warfare in the Pacific. Gunn stripped the bomber's glass nose and replaced it with solid metal packed with up to 8 forward-firing machine guns. This modification addressed a fundamental problem with conventional bombing attacks against ships. High-altitude bombing required precise timing and favorable conditions, while ships could maneuver to avoid incoming bombs. Ben then developed the skip bombing tactic, flying just above the waves and releasing bombs that ricocheted across the water into enemy hulls. Combined with Gunn's forward-firing armament, this created a new type of warfare that maximized the strengths of American industrial capacity while minimizing traditional Japanese advantages in naval combat. The transformation of the B-25 from medium bomber to maritime predator reflected broader changes in Allied strategy and tactics. In the Pacific War, B-25 Mitchell bombers were frequently used at low altitude, acting as ground attack aircraft instead of as medium bombers. These strafing aircraft were first devised in the field by the likes of Major Paul Irving "Pappy" Gunn, who initially modified A-20 Havoc bombers, but later also submitted requests to perform similar modifications to B-25 bombers by adding guns and eliminating any unnecessary weight and space. The scale of these modifications was unprecedented. The resulting B-25G aircraft each had additional machine guns and a 75mm M4 cannon, the largest caliber weapon ever equipped in an American bomber. Later variants would push the envelope even further. A later variant, B-25J, increased the number of machine guns to 18. The mathematical implications of this firepower concentration were staggering. A single 12-airplane squadron of B-25s carried more 50-caliber machine guns than 4 infantry regiments. These modifications fundamentally altered the tactical doctrine governing anti-shipping operations. Traditional naval warfare assumed that air attacks would come from high altitude, allowing defending ships to maneuver and use their anti-aircraft guns effectively. The skip-bombing B-25s, approaching at masthead height with concentrated forward-firing armament, negated these defensive advantages while maximizing their own offensive capabilities. As the Japanese convoy approached the waters where this new form of warfare would be tested, Allied intelligence was tracking their every movement. Kenny realized that air power was going to be the single most effective weapon in the Southwest Pacific area of operations, and he immediately began organizing his forces to make them the offensive weapon that was so badly needed in the theater. In spite of opposition from the ground officers on General Douglas MacArthur's staff, Kenny began making use of the fighters, bombers, and troop carrier transports under his command to start pushing the Japanese to the other side of the mountains, and ultimately, out of New Guinea altogether. The Allied forces assembled to meet the Japanese convoy represented a perfect storm of tactical innovation, technological superiority, and operational intelligence. The Allies had more aircraft in the area, with 207 bombers and 129 fighters based in Papua, but they lacked anti-shipping weapons. This apparent weakness had been transformed into strength through the revolutionary modifications pioneered by Gunn and others. The battle plan that emerged reflected both the strengths and limitations of Allied forces in the theater. The plan called for B-17s from the 43rd Bomb Group and B-25s from the 38th Bomb Group to attack the convoy from medium-level altitudes immediately before a masthead-level attack by the skip-bombing strafers from the 3rd Attack Group. The RAF bow fighters would go in just ahead of the skip bombers to attack the gun crews with machine gun and cannon fire. The attack force would be protected by P-38s from the 35th and 49th Fighter Groups. The 90th Bomb Group's B-24s would carry out reconnaissance missions tracking the convoy's progress. This coordinated approach represented a fundamental shift from the piecemeal attacks that had characterized earlier Pacific air operations. The plan acknowledged that individual aircraft, regardless of their modifications, could not alone overcome the concentrated defensive fire of a well-escorted convoy. Only through coordinated attacks from multiple directions and altitudes could Allied forces achieve the concentration necessary to overwhelm Japanese defenses. The morning of March 2, 1943, dawned with weather conditions that initially favored the Japanese convoy. From 27 February to 1 March, the Solomon and Bismarck seas were lashed by storms. At 3 p.m. on 1 March, a patrolling B-24 Liberator spotted a convoy through a break in the clouds. Poor visibility and rough seas made it difficult for Allied reconnaissance to maintain contact with the convoy, giving Japanese commanders hope that they might reach their destination undetected. But Allied persistence would prove decisive. At 10 a.m. the next morning, another Liberator flew out of a cloud bank to discover the convoy below him. This time, daylight and clear skies allowed a formation of B-17 flying fortresses to attack the convoy. The initial attacks by heavy bombers achieved mixed results, but they served to disperse the convoy's tight defensive formation and provided valuable intelligence about Japanese defensive capabilities. Heavy bombers were often ineffective against ships, but on this occasion, they managed to sink one, the Kyokusei Maru, and damage 2 of the 8 transports. More importantly, these preliminary attacks forced the Japanese convoy to break formation and reduce the concentrated anti-aircraft fire that would otherwise have awaited the low-level attackers. The stage was now set for the revolutionary tactics that Gunn and his colleagues had developed. As the morning of March 3rd progressed, Allied forces began assembling for what would become one of the most devastating air attacks in military history. Allied plans called for the formations to assemble over Cape Ward Hunt at 9:30 a.m. and to attack the convoy at 10 Mao. When Major Ed Larner got the word that the attack was on at 8:55, he shouted to the crews in his squadron, "Cape Ward Hunt, 09:30, let's go." Major Larner had become one of the B-25 squadron commanders who became especially adept at attacking shipping at low altitudes. He and his commerce-destroying squadron had become expert at skipping bombs into ground targets at low altitudes and strafing the nose and side gun firing 50 calibers. The crews under his command represented the culmination of months of tactical development and training. Kenny recalled, "I saw a couple of them practicing on the old wreck on the reef outside Port Moresby. They didn't miss. It was pretty shooting and pretty skip bombing." This training would prove crucial in the coming battle, where accuracy at low altitude under intense defensive fire would determine the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. As the attack formations approached their target, Japanese convoy commanders were confident in their defensive preparations. The concentration of escorts and fighter coverage represented one of the most heavily defended convoys of the Pacific War. But they were about to discover that their enemy had developed tactics specifically designed to neutralize these defensive advantages. The calm waters of the Bismarck Sea exploded into chaos as American B-25 Mitchell bombers roared in low, their noses blazing with streams of .50 caliber fire. The concentrated firepower of the modified B-25s created a devastating storm of lead that swept across the decks of the Japanese transports. Japanese Colonel Teishi Nakamura, standing on the bridge of the transport Kiyosu Maru, could only watch in disbelief. The skip bombing tactics pioneered by Allied forces achieved immediate and devastating results. Major Ed Larner's lead bomber struck first, his 8 guns shredding decks and gun crews before 2 500-pound bombs skipped into Teiyo Maru. In seconds, the ship was torn open and sinking. The speed and precision of the attack left Japanese defenders with no time to organize an effective response. Lieutenant Ralph Dello followed, his bombs ripping through Kiyosu Maru, Nakamura's own vessel. Within minutes, it too was gone. The systematic destruction of the convoy proceeded with terrifying efficiency as each B-25 delivered its deadly payload with devastating accuracy. The concentrated nature of the Allied attack overwhelmed Japanese defensive capabilities. The resulting 137 bombers with supporting fighter escorts overwhelmed the 42 Japanese naval Zeros protecting the convoy. Lacking radar to vector their fighters to the bombers, the Zeros became embroiled with the Allied fighter escorts, while the heavy and medium bombers punched through unscathed to strike the convoy. The tactical innovations employed by Allied forces achieved results that exceeded their most optimistic projections. The American A-20s and B-25s employed the new skip bombing technique and recently installed forward-firing armaments to devastating effect. Every ship suffered some damage, several seriously. 2 destroyers, including flagship Shirayuki, and a transport were sunk. Another destroyer and 3 merchant ships were knocked dead in the water. Several ships were burning. The human cost of the attack was immediate and catastrophic. Thousands of soldiers who had been packed into the transport ships found themselves trapped below decks as their vessels took direct hits from skip bombs and sustained strafing from concentrated machine gun fire. The speed and surprise of the attack left most with no opportunity to reach their assigned battle stations or organize defensive fires. By noon, the sea was littered with burning ships and oil-slicked debris. All 8 Japanese transports were sunk, along with 4 destroyers. Nearly 7,000 soldiers had sailed from Rabaul. Fewer than 1,300 survived. The magnitude of this loss represented one of the most complete defeats in naval history. The follow-up attacks ensured that Japanese rescue efforts would be severely hampered. The next wave of Allied aircraft nearly finished the convoy off, critically damaging 1 destroyer and sinking the previously crippled destroyer and 2 more cargo ships. The systematic nature of these attacks demonstrated that Allied forces were not content merely to damage the convoy, but were determined to achieve its complete destruction. The efficiency of the Allied victory was matched by the minimal cost in personnel and equipment. Allied losses? Just 13 airmen. This extraordinarily favorable loss ratio reflected both the effectiveness of the new tactics and the degree to which Allied forces had achieved tactical and technological superiority in this form of warfare. The aftermath of the battle provided grim testimony to the effectiveness of the modified B-25s. By this time, half of the transport ships have been lost or are sinking. In the final phase of the attack, 12 A-20 Bostons attacked, claiming 11 direct hits, and 6 B-25s reported 4 additional hits. The systematic destruction of the convoy proceeded with mechanical precision, as each wave of attackers found increasingly defenseless targets. The follow-up operations revealed the comprehensive nature of Allied planning. During the night of 3-4 March, 5 USN torpedo boats attacked what was left of the convoy. They finished of a sinking transport and scattered or destroyed lifeboats. By daybreak on the 4 March, all 8 Japanese transports had been sunk, and 4 of their escorting destroyers had also been lost. Perhaps most controversially, Allied forces continued their attacks against survivors in the water. Through 4 and into 5 March, Allied aircraft were dispatched to strafe Japanese life rafts and rescue vessels to prevent the large number of Japanese who had escaped their sinking transports from being rescued and arriving in Leh to be rearmed and sent to the front. There was a deadly race for the survivors between Japanese submarines and Allied aircraft. It was a horrible task, and one that haunted several of the aircrews for years to come. It is one of the realities of war that they had to be prevented from getting to the fighting in New Guinea. The strategic implications of the Battle of the Bismarck Sea extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. Imamura's chief of staff flew to Imperial General Headquarters to report on the disaster. It was decided that there would be no more attempts to land troops at Leh. The losses incurred in the Bismarck Sea caused grave concern for the security of Leh and Rabaul and resulted in a change of strategy. The human cost of the battle was staggering. The entire force of Japanese troops, supplies, and equipment had been destroyed. The encounter had cost the enemy an estimated 15,000 lives. U.S. losses came to 13 men killed and 12 wounded. While historians later revised these casualty figures downward, the actual losses remained devastating. 890 Japanese soldiers and sailors were killed in the battle, or drowned trapped in their sinking ships, or drifting in the wreckage spread. Only 850 reached Leh. Few were battle-ready, and most had lost their weapons and equipment. The tactical effectiveness of the modified B-25s in the Bismarck Sea battle validated the innovations pioneered by Gunn and his colleagues. Of the 137 bombs dropped in low-level attacks, 48, 35%, were claimed to have hit, but only 29, 7.5%, of the 387 bombs dropped from medium altitude. This compared favorably with efforts in August and September 1942, when only 3% of bombs dropped were claimed to have scored hits. The precision of the low-level attacks demonstrated the superiority of the new tactics over traditional high-altitude bombing. It was noted that the high and medium-altitude attacks scored few hits but dispersed the convoy, while the strafing runs from the bow fighters had knocked out many of the ship's anti-aircraft defenses. The coordinated nature of the attack maximized the effectiveness of each component while minimizing the risks to individual aircraft and crews. The personal accounts of participating airmen provide vivid testimony to the effectiveness of the modified aircraft. In the Bismarck Sea battle, we strafed from the front. The ships were careening in all directions. I saw a 500-pound bomb level with our starboard wing going at the same altitude and same speed that we were, that a Mitchell had just dropped, maybe 20 feet off the water. You also had to dodge bomb splashes at the Bismarck Sea, because the Liberators and 17s were dropping from 6,000, 10,000 feet, and they'd make huge splashes when we were about 20 feet off the sea. These splashes were 30 to 50 feet across and followed by a tremendous spout of water. We had to fly through those. The aftermath of the battle saw continued development of the concepts that had proven so effective. Since the Bismarck Sea action had proved the concept was sound, all light and medium bomber pilots were trained in low-altitude bombing techniques. Jock Hennebrie's 3D bomb group became especially adept. Further proof came in an attack at Rabaul on November 2, 1943, a date that ranks with the Bismarck Sea Battle in the history of the war in the South Pacific. The broader significance of the battle extended to fundamental changes in Pacific War strategy. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea proved that air power could dominate the seas. The B-25's 8-gun nose, born from field ingenuity and desperation, had rewritten the rules of naval warfare. Traditional assumptions about the relationship between naval and air power had been fundamentally challenged. The immediate consequences for Japanese strategy were profound. As a result of the losses, the Japanese never again risked sending a large convoy into water that was controlled by American aircraft. The loss of an entire reinforcement division, along with its equipment and supplies, forced fundamental revisions in Japanese operational planning throughout the Pacific. From a technological perspective, the battle validated the concept of field modifications and tactical innovation under combat conditions. We hurriedly remodeled every B-25 we could get our hands on and made the phrase air blockade mean something. The success of these modifications demonstrated that American industrial flexibility and innovative capacity could overcome initial tactical disadvantages. The human stories behind the tactical innovations reveal the individual contributions that made the victory possible. Major Ed Larner, who led the crucial B-25 attacks, had spent months perfecting the skip bombing techniques that proved so devastating. Major Ed Larner led the B-25s in the attack. The gunships strafed the decks of the ships as they made their skip bombing attacks. His leadership in developing and executing these new tactics was crucial to the battle's outcome. The testimony of participating aircrew provides insight into the personal cost of the victory. Veterans recalled the difficulty of attacking survivors in the water, a decision that was militarily necessary but psychologically traumatic for many airmen. These accounts remind us that even decisive victories came at a personal cost to those who executed them. The strategic assessment of senior commanders reflected recognition that the battle had fundamentally altered the trajectory of the Pacific War. General MacArthur sent his gratitude and felicitations on the magnificent victory, which cannot fail to go down in history as one of the most complete and annihilating combats of all time. Such assessments, while perhaps inflated by wartime propaganda considerations, reflected genuine recognition of the battle's significance. The tactical lessons learned at Bismarck Sea were quickly disseminated throughout Allied forces in the Pacific. After the Bismarck Sea, we converted to 8.50 calibers in the nose, which were awesome, absolutely awesome. The rapid adoption of these modifications throughout the theater demonstrated institutional commitment to the tactical innovations that had proven so effective. The battle also demonstrated the crucial importance of intelligence in modern warfare. As Japan prepared Operation 81, Allied intelligence based in Townsville, Queensland, and Washington intercepted crucial information about the Japanese plans. Combined with reconnaissance missions over Rabaul, the Allies knew of the impending convoy. Lieutenant General George C. Kenney and Group Captain William Bulgari devised a precise and coordinated plan to thwart the Japanese convoy. Despite challenges during rehearsals, they believed an all-out assault would be the most effective strategy. The comprehensive nature of the Allied victory was reflected in the complete destruction of Japanese offensive capabilities in the region. Not only were the transport ships and their embarked troops lost, but the escort vessels and supporting aircraft also suffered devastating casualties. More than 3,000 Japanese troops and sailors drowned as a consequence, and the supplies sank with their ships. Of 150 Japanese fighter planes that attempted to engage the American bombers, 102 were shot down. The technological innovations pioneered at Bismarck Sea would continue to influence Pacific War operations for the remainder of the conflict. The B-25, transformed from a conventional medium bomber into a maritime predator, became the template for similar modifications to other aircraft types. The success of these field modifications demonstrated that technological innovation, under combat conditions, could be as important as formal research and development programs. The personal cost of the victory extended beyond Allied casualties to include the psychological burden carried by aircrew who participated in attacks on survivors. These men understood the military necessity of preventing enemy reinforcements from reaching their destination. But the human cost of such decisions would haunt many of them for years after the war. The battle's outcome also reflected the cumulative effect of American industrial capacity and technological innovation. The ability to rapidly produce, modify, and deploy large numbers of aircraft gave Allied forces advantages that went beyond individual tactical innovations. The modified B-25s were effective not just because of their technical capabilities, but because they could be produced in sufficient numbers to achieve decisive concentration at the crucial point. From a strategic perspective, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea marked a turning point in the Pacific War's trajectory. Japanese recognition that large-scale reinforcement by sea was no longer feasible forced fundamental revisions in their defensive strategy. The loss of an entire division, along with its equipment and supplies, represented a blow from which Japanese forces in New Guinea never fully recovered. The legacy of the 8,000 Japanese soldiers who never made it to shore extends beyond the immediate tactical and strategic consequences of their loss. Their fate demonstrated that technological innovation, tactical flexibility, and operational intelligence could overcome seemingly overwhelming odds. The B-25 Mitchell, transformed by American ingenuity from a conventional bomber into a ship-killing predator, had become the instrument of one of the most complete victories in military history. In the final analysis, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea represented more than just a tactical victory or a technological triumph. It demonstrated that in modern warfare, the side that could most effectively combine technological innovation, tactical flexibility, and operational intelligence would possess decisive advantages over opponents who relied on traditional approaches to military problems. The thousands of Japanese soldiers who perished in the waters of the Bismarck Sea became casualties not just of American firepower, but of a revolutionary approach to warfare that transformed conventional aircraft into instruments of maritime destruction. The B-25 Mitchell, in its various modified configurations, had proven that air power could indeed dominate the seas, rewriting the rules of naval warfare and establishing precedents that would influence military doctrine for generations to come. The calm waters of the Bismarck Sea, which had briefly reflected the confident passage of a Japanese convoy, would forever bear witness to the moment when American innovation and determination turned a medium bomber into an angel of death, ensuring that 8,000 enemy soldiers would never reach the shores they had sailed so far to defend.